right, people, welcome to another episode here on the Green Living Chat podcast. My name is David Owusi-Mensah. Thanks for joining us today on this episode of the Green Living Chat podcast. And we have an interesting conversation for you today on our new Paradigms of Education segment. I am super honored to have a conversation with Dr. Julian Kirchherr on the Fabrications in Sustainability and Transitions literature. Dr. Julian, as we say in English, is a researcher at the Copernicus Institution of Sustainability and Development at Utrecht University and an associate partner at McKinsey & Company. Julian holds a doctorate from the School of Geography and Environment at the University of Oxford, and he is the author of the book The Lean PhD, which is about maximizing research impact beyond academia. There's definitely a lot of things to say about Julian, and you just have to meet him to understand what I'm talking about. But one thing I could surely say is, if you're looking for passion, Julian is definitely the definition for passion. His article, which is the conversation of today, has received incredible response from the public. Over 1 million views in a LinkedIn post just in 7 days. It is currently the most read paper on the Circular Economy and Sustainability Journal and the Springer publication, and has received several endorsements from top professors and journals engaging with him after seeing this paper published. Just a gist of what we discussed in today's conversation was what inspired Julian to write such a thought-provoking scientific article on the fabrications in sustainability in peer-reviewed articles? Does he consider this as greenwashing that is happening in academia? What are some of the contributing factors that are trickling these issues happening in academia? And we talked about the impact some of these issues are having both in academia and in the industry, and definitely what will be the way forward. This and more in today's conversation. I just can't wait to share this conversation with you, and I know that this is going to be an important conversation that we need to start among all stakeholders within this space. One thing I would just ask you to do before we dive into this conversation is that why don't you share this with anyone in academia or even in the industry? Well, who else is ready to dive into today's conversation? Just can't wait. Let's dive into this conversation with Dr. Julian. See you on the other side. Hello, Julian. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Green Living Chat podcast. It's exciting to have you today, and I really can't wait for us to dive into this conversation. So welcome, Julian.
Thank you so much, David. Pleasure to be here and excited for this chat. Let's go.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I got into your page on LinkedIn and I saw your background. I think it's really super interesting. I'm really looking out for people who are in academia, bridging the gap between the academia and the industry. And you seem to be like the perfect example of such people. And so kudos to everything that you're doing. I would like our listeners to know a little bit about your journey, especially because we have a lot of youthful audience who listen to us. And so we are always concerned about your transitions in life, how your childhood was, and how you got into what you're doing now. Would you like to take us through that journey briefly?
Yeah, I'd love to. And let me indeed start with the childhood. So I grew up in a small town in Western Germany, North Rhine-Westphalia. My grandfather was a farmer. He grew up in a village, not in a town, that's 4 kilometers in front of the town. That's called Vierhausen, which translates to 4 houses, which you can more or less take literally. I think there was like 7 houses, 7 farms, but it was really, really tiny. And then I grew up in Weal, which is kind of like 4 kilometers away from Vierhausen, 30,000 people, a really small town. I think I was always, since kind of like a very young age, very keen to get out of that small town, right? Everything that comes along with growing up in a small town in terms of
a little bit boring
mindset. Yeah, exactly. A little bit boring, a bit conservative for me, right? The mindset of a small town. And for a long time, I think tried to emancipate myself a lot from this. And then for my studies, I went to the Netherlands, I went to London, I went to Singapore, I did my PhD in
Nice.
Oxford, but what the one thing has been probably that stuck to me, possibly from my town, but possibly even more from my parents and my mom, is a keen interest in sustainability. So my mother has always been extremely engaged when it came to green and sustainable living. And I pushed it away, especially in my youth, quite a bit from myself. But then throughout my early adulthood, I interned with the UN Environment Program. I interned with GIZ, which is like the German development agency, also in environmental stuff. I actually did a master's in Singapore then in environmental policy. So somehow kind of like the footprint of my mom kind of like stuck to me. And what I had always thought about and wished for since I was one of these kids, I need to admit, I liked going to school, I liked studying. And I always thought when I was like 17, 18, 19, that kind of like my dream job is I want to be a professor somewhere. You know? And I had this in my mind basically from like 17, 18, before I started studying onwards even. And the reason why I actually ended up, at least for 1.5 years, in management consulting, so with McKinsey, was because I needed money for my PhD. So I wanted to do my PhD on Oxford University, and it's very expensive, right? And my parents were kind of like teachers in a small town, so middle class, but like far away from being able to kind of like afford that their kid goes to Oxford. So I looked around after my master's. How could I finance my PhD? And there was like government scholarships, etc., but they would just cover a small portion because Oxford is ridiculously expensive, both the living as well as the tuition fees. So it just wasn't enough. And then I came across this company. And back then for me, it was a company just kind of like McKinsey, and they a large management consultancy, and they promised that if I work for them for 1.5 years, they would pay for my PhD, half of the tuition fees.
Exciting.
And also for the living costs. So I thought that sounds almost too good to be true. Let's do it. I joined McKinsey in 1st of July 2013, and I worked for McKinsey for exactly 18 months, which was the minimum duration to work at McKinsey in order to get money for the PhD. And then January 1st, 2015, I started my PhD as I had dreamt of in Oxford. And I thought, I'll never see kind of like McKinsey again. And I did my PhD with a lot of passion. I was done after roughly 2 years, actually a bit less than 2 years. I put a lot of time in it. I was very passionate about it. And I got an assistant professorship in the Netherlands right after. And then basically January 1st, 2017, so 2 years after I started my PhD, I started as an assistant professor in the Netherlands. And I thought basically, wow, like I was 27 at that time. I thought, wow, I've kind of like reached kind of like all of my life goals.
You're there.
I'm there, assistant professor. And now comes the part how I started to combine academia and industry, because I think those mere 18 months at McKinsey had again left a big footmark on me. Right? So I began to realize that the life as an assistant professor, the life as a kind of like 100% full-time academic, is actually not the life that I'm excited about, because I felt it was too far away from actually impacting what businesses, what policymakers, what civil society does on sustainability. So after round about a year, I actually decided, when I'd reached all of my criteria in Utrecht for tenure, which is usually the dream of all academics, so you have a like job where you cannot get fired. Once I'd reached all of these criteria, I told myself, okay, I cannot be kind of like tenured now, but I need to do kind of like something different. And I actually called McKinsey again. The day I'd reached all of these criteria for tenure, and I called my former mentor and I said, hey, I think this is really stupid that I quit McKinsey. Can I come back? And McKinsey sent me a contract with the DHL Express to Utrecht, my small apartment in Utrecht. It was there within 48 hours. And then I signed it again. And 2 weeks later, I started working again at McKinsey. Every Thursday, I had to take off at McKinsey because I still had to do my lectures as assistant professor. Obviously, my students kind of like it wasn't their fault. So I said, I'm going to finish the lecture. And then I agreed with the university that I would keep a small position, 10% position at the university. So by Fridays, I would always do academia. But Monday to Thursday, I would do my kind of like consulting life. And I've done this ever since early 2018. And to me, it's a lot of fun, and I love it. And I think it allows me also to be very blunt in academia. And what I mean with that is not to play by the rules in academia, because I don't need academia to kind of like pay my bills, but to pursue the kind of research that I am most excited about, right? And that's, yeah, that was not a long answer, David. I hope not too long, but that's basically the story of how I combined academia and industry.
Wow, I love the background story. And I've heard so many stories about, people and how they transitioned into their life and sustainability and all that. And I can see a glimpse of what you mentioned about your mom and how she made an impact in your life. And I really love this part where you're talking about what actually is inspiring you to bridge the gap between the industry and academia. Most importantly, I think your students can attest to this, that your teaching skills and probably the things that you teach in your classes is more practical than probably what they experience in other classes, of course. And this is what we need. Of course, today we're going to talk about your paper, and it's definitely going to throw a little bit more light on what we have talked about. People listening to us will understand why we got into this. With all these experiences that you've been through, what is the one thing that you think brings you fulfillment?
Professionally speaking, the one thing that brings me fulfillment is really impacting organizations at scale to move into at least what I consider as the right direction. And this is the kind of like sustainable direction. I think sustainability obviously is a big buzzword, right? And it can be widely debated about exactly what that always means. But having an impact on organizations that help them to thrive in a sustainable manner is something I'm very, very excited about. I think that's my passion. And this is the link to academia, helping them by providing deep knowledge, right? And I think that's why also if I was 100% consultant, I would not be like as satisfied as I am these days, at least in my life.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes in consulting, right, if I may say, I've done consulting for 9 years now. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes in consulting, we jump to conclusions too quickly. So we sometimes don't take the time to really think through a problem very, very deeply and only then come up with recommendation. But oftentimes the pure consulting is a bit like you look at the problem and you feel like, oh, the project is just for weeks. Basically on day one, I need to tell the solution. So what I like about academia, and especially this combination of academia and consulting, is ideally I spend my Fridays doing deep thinking, really understanding stuff. And then from Monday to Thursday, I inject that thinking into kind of like these organizations, and I help them to have impact. And that's, I mean, this is of course very idealist now, and my weeks don't always look like this, but I think that brings across the idea of how I think about industry work and academic work being connected, right? I actually think both need each other, right? I think there shouldn't be, I think consulting needs academia, but academia also needs maybe not consulting, but needs also kind of like a voice in the world outside of academia. Huh?
Definitely. I mean, obviously, there are a lot of things that I have to learn from you because people have lazy days on Fridays, but your Fridays are, the most effective part of the week where you do a lot of brainstorming and other things. But one thing I love about the answer you gave me is normally when I ask people this question, they talk about life and but the answer you're giving me here makes me feel like you find a lot of fulfillment in your current everyday work and what you're doing. And that is lovely because it's encouraging for the young people around who are now transitioning into the industry or probably trying to choose courses that are very necessary for their future careers. But then this leads us into the fact that you wrote a scientific article that on fabrications that are in sustainability and transitions in literature, and it's very, very thought-provoking. And I mean, I saw you writing that your paper just got published or something on LinkedIn. I read the abstract of the paper and I was like, what? Who allowed this paper out? I mean, who allows this? And previously, just few days before I saw that post, I was having a conversation on Twitter and I mentioned that, has anyone realized, some of these political issues that are in academia? And someone just jumped on this conversation and was like, what are you talking about? I've been in academia for so many years and I haven't seen any issues in there. And I was like, these issues are normally not spoken about. But then there are issues that are actually happening. So when I saw your paper, I was super excited. Can you take us through this short journey? What provoked you to write this paper? Obviously, you're very passionate about the industry and how we can influence the academia and the vice versa as well. But then what actually provoked you to write such a thought-provoking article?
I read academic articles on sustainability, right? Mostly on Fridays, but not just on Fridays. And I've been reading them also for roughly a decade now. And as I shared previously, I usually read these articles on my Fridays in order to make an impact from Monday to Thursday. And what I felt an increasing number of Fridays was that I read the entire day academic articles published in the most prestigious academic journals out there. And barely could I ever find anything in these articles where I would find that this is of any use to the practitioners, to the policymakers, to the businesses, to civil society out there. I could spend an entire day reading academic articles in the most prestigious journals and would find nothing in there of relevance to the folks I work with from Monday to Thursday. And well, in the beginning, I thought maybe I'm just looking in the wrong journals and maybe
overthinking.
Yeah, maybe I'm just overthinking, or maybe I'm not understanding these articles, right? But so I looked around a bit more widely, right? Other journals. And I mean, I've also published a lot myself, right? So I read also in the journals. It felt at some point relatively confident that I actually understand what's in there, and that what's in there, oftentimes, an excuse kind of like being very pointed on. But from a practitioner perspective, what's in there is a joke, or to put it as I wrote it in the article, it's bullshit. It's what I called in the article, scholarly bullshit. It's not adding to the knowledge, to the body of knowledge whatsoever. It has no use whatsoever to practitioners out there. And that actually, David, got me very angry, got me very upset, right? Because the way I think about research and what I shared previously, what drives me, right, is using knowledge in order to apply knowledge, right? And I read all of these articles and I was like, wow, like these are ivory tower discussions that could not be more removed from practical relevance.
Yeah.
And that really, really, really upset me. So one evening I sat down with a philosopher friend in Berlin in a bar, and I started ranting about it. And I had
good
a few
location.
Beer. Yeah, good location. And I had a few beer already. And that's kind of like after a few beer where I said, what this is scholarly bullshit. And then I said, I will write an article in an academic journal, no matter how long it takes to get it published. I will write an article on this very topic, on scholarly bullshit. And that's what happened.
Wow. Well, if you're listening and you're doubting or you don't know what we are talking about, the link to this paper article is in the show notes. So dive into it, pause this episode, just go and read the abstract and get back into the episode. Afterwards, you can just dive into the rest of it. Because, I mean, this paper is what we need, especially in an era where, climate change has become a very big issue. Myself, I'm advocating, of course, that's the reason why we created this whole podcast since 2 years ago, announcing and educating people on what sustainability is. And the reason why I also kind of really, really resonate with this is if you go to our podcast website, just up there, we say that I think it's time that we define sustainability, because in the industry, it has become crazy. You have already touched a little bit on what I was about to ask you, but I want to actually let you, of course, mention it again in case you have something else to mention about this. Do you think that these series of publications or these fabrications or all these things that are happening in these publications, do you think it has anything to do with what we call greenwashing in the industry?
So I think there's a twofold answers to this, right? Which is, first part of the answer is, let's look into these scholarly academic publications that are peer-reviewed. I don't think this is necessarily greenwashing. But what I think this is driven by is the incentives in the academic system. Now, if you are a professor, if you're a scholar, what you need to do is you need to write a lot of articles in very respected journals that get cited a lot. If you're the editor-in-chief of an academic journal, you need to get quite a few articles submitted that then get cited a lot. So the so-called impact factor, the influence of your journal, goes up. Now, there's a few topics out there that are trending, that are buzzwords topic, such as you've just mentioned, sustainability, circular economy, biomimicry, you name it. And these are topics that a lot of people are interested in. As an academic, it's easy to get money to research these topics, relatively easy. So what happens is academics collect research funding to write on these topics, because they also, beyond writing articles, they also need to raise funding and then have PhDs that basically write the articles for them. And so the academics collect research grants, hire PhD students, postdocs to write articles about these buzzwords. And then they submit these to a journal, and the journal knows, the editor of the chief in the journal knows, that there's a lot of articles coming on this topic. So no matter if the article is actually good or not, just because of the mere growth of this kind of like buzzword market, that article will get a lot of citations. So if the article gets citations, editor-in-chief is doing very well because higher impact factor. And the PhD students, of course, is also very happy because he knows the editor-in-chief wants my article because of the buzzword. So it's easy for the PhD student, postdoc, professor to publish. So in a way, it's a win-win for the professor and the editor-in-chief, because they get to publish articles and the professors raise money, which allows them to write articles. The problem with this system is it's entirely disconnected from practical relevance.
Exactly.
Because basically they're optimizing for citations, they're optimizing for number of publications. They're not optimizing for substance, what's actually in these articles. And that's the problem in the academic system. And the academic system these days, we've gotten so focused on quantified targets, such as how many citations do you have, that we have forgotten what the citation was in day one supposed to signify, which was that a paper that has a lot of citations is a paper that actually has a lot of influence, impact, also in a practical sense, right?
Yeah.
But the problem with every target that you set is that once people realize this is the target, they only optimize for the quantitative target and not for the deeper construct behind it. That's the problem we have in academia. What's fundamentally driving my point of view, why we have so many bullshit publications that are of no value whatsoever to practice, to the body of knowledge of this topic. Now, you ask about greenwashing. There's a second chunk of articles that are more what I would call practitioner reports. These are reports put forward by foundations, NGOs, and a lot also coming from industry. My view is, and this is not me as an individual speaking, not associated with my university or my company. My personal view here is that a lot of these practitioner publications we see are indeed greenwashing, right? If you compare, I'm not going to name any company, but if you compare, I think you can take almost any of the largest 40 German companies, the amount of pages in an annual report that's spent on sustainability versus the amount of FTE, people, or the amount of revenue in that company being made from sustainability, you'll find a huge discrepancy. I'm just making up these figures to illustrate the point.
Exactly.
There may be 30% of an annual report of a company these days may talk somewhat about sustainability, how much they do. And then you look in the FTE, you look in the revenue, and maybe 1% of the people in the company and less than 1% of the revenue actually come from sustainability, right? So there's a lot of talk. There's still, until today, in my point of view, little walking the walk. So I think, at least in the companies I've looked into, again, my personal opinion, there is a lot of greenwashing up until today.
Well, I really love that discussion that you're bringing up, and I think it's unfolding lots of thoughts in my mind. I really need to reflect on this conversation again and again, because, I mean, I love the fact that you came from the academia sector, talking about all the things, the political things, and all the processes that, you know, students have to go through together with their departments, and also from the journal's perspective as well. I'm wrapping up with my PhD currently, and I totally can relate with everything that you're saying that is happening in academia. Of course, I also started my company about 3 years ago, and we are also environmental consulting. And I can also relate from that side, because we realize that we want to get into, you know, people's hearts and get them to understand what is happening in, you know, their wastewater treatment facilities and all that. But we realize that there are other companies that are spearheading all these initiatives. And I kind of relate that to what you mentioned with, the company's reports and the things that they are doing. So sustainability has just become like a funny word that we can all just use to hide behind the things that we're using. And it's funny that academia is actually following this trend. But let's go into the paper briefly. And I know that, of course, all these things that you mentioned, it's not happening with every single paper. But then you mentioned in your paper that about 50% of articles in interdisciplinary sustainability and transition journals may be added to this category that you're mentioning. So how bad is this issue?
So the 50%, right? They were my guess. And it's a bit of a subjective guess, right? If you give me 50 articles, oftentimes I may actually even find that more than 50% are bullshit. I think it's a nice guess that I made with regards to literature. I think the true figure is probably higher, and I would ask scholars who may want to replicate this study or double check my number to also look into it. But obviously, it's a bit subjective, right? What's bullshit, what's not bullshit. However, what I did in the paper is I came up with a typology of scholarly bullshit. So I basically said there's 5 types of bullshit. And let's maybe go through them quickly, because I think it gives a bit more flesh to what I mean, right? What are the issues with these papers? Now, I think the first type of bullshit I read a lot is actually the type of bullshit that's least worse, which is what I call boring question scholarship, which is research that examines a question where we already know the answer, right? So maybe there's been 15 papers, 50 papers, 100 papers on exactly the same question. And that paper just says, okay, let me just answer the question again. And usually they find exactly the same stuff everybody has found before. So to me, I don't learn anything. So I'm not very excited about these papers, right? There still goes a lot of effort in these, but I think it's good to replicate sometimes, to double check findings. But still, to me, this is kind of like first category of bullshit. Now, second category of bullshit, I am much more critical against. I call this category the literature review of literature reviews. Literature reviews are very popular in academia. Again, it's all about citations, because if you have a literature review, you've summarized the field, many people will cite you. They'll say, well, they don't want to summarize the field themselves, so they just say, well, David has done the literature review. He has found in the synthesis of the literature, et cetera, et cetera. So you get a lot of citations by doing literature review. That's why academics love to do literature reviews. Usually you'd think if there's one literature review per year on a field, that should be fine. Now, because academics love it and journals also love it because they get so many citations.
Yes.
What is happening now is that on many sustainability topics, in 1 year, you'll see something like 15, 20, 25 literature reviews coming out. To some extent, some literature reviews are actually just summarizing other literature reviews. I mean, there's nothing new they have found. Like nothing, I mean, boring question scholarship, at least they went out there in the field, did some interviews, collected some data. Literature reviews, just basically, there's no value add whatsoever. And these are just driven by the fact that everybody wants citations. That's category 2. Now, category 3 is recycled research. And that category is closest to what you called greenwashing.
Yeah.
Which is, there's a lot of great scholars out there that have worked on the same topic for, 30 years. Now they see there's a new buzzword coming up. They want to boost their citation count again. They want to raise a bit more money. So they feel like, okay, I need to act as if I'm actually doing something different as compared to what I've done for 30 years. So they take their existing research, something like product service systems or something like recycling, and they just stamp the latest buzzword on it. Like they say, recycling is now circular economy. That sounds so much cooler, so much more innovative. They don't actually engage with any of the research that has been done on this new buzzword topic. They just do the same stuff they've always done, and they stamp the new buzzword on. That's also not good scholarship, right? Because they really don't engage with the body of knowledge. I also call it bullshit. The fourth one, I think, is very, very problematic. And I call this master thesis madness. Some people, when I put the article out on Twitter, they attacked me and they said, Julian, how can you be so mean to master students? Do you want to bully the master students that they don't do good research? No, I don't want to bully the master students. I think master students should try to publish their research. And I think it's wonderful if a professor is keen to help a master student publish the research, maybe the research together, publish it together. I think that's a wonderful thing. Now, what's happening though, is that there's a lot of professors out there now. And actually in the previous version of the article, I put some names in there, and then the reviewers forced me to remove them. They said, this is getting too personal, Julian. So I'm not going to name any names, but there's a bunch of professors. People in the field will know, who basically just have an army of master students that writes an article on a buzzword topic with no guidance whatsoever, almost no data, shoddy application of theory. The visuals in the article look like they've been created with paint. And the professors put their famous name on the article, submit it to a journal, and the journal publishes it because the journal knows, famous professor on their buzzword topic, no matter the quality, it's going to get citations, it's going to help me. This is master thesis madness. That's not good scholarship. That's really lowering the bar of academic scholarship. So I'm really against this. And there's publishers out there, this is another dimension I've mentioned, who charge money per article. So it's not only that they want to have more impact factor, but for every article they publish, sustainability is one of these open access journals, they charge 3,000 euros. So they're like, I don't give a damn what the quality is. Every time you give me an article, I get 3,000 euros, right? I mean, that's really what's kind of like also driving it on the journal side, not just the impact factor.
Yeah.
That's master thesis matters. And then to close, the last type of research, and my article on bullshit itself can be counted into that category of research, is what I call activist rants, which is scholarship that is just built on claims. There's no data in there. It's just built on feel-good claims, stuff that people like to hear, stuff that's politically correct, where everybody just nods. There's no data, there's no evidence. And it gets published because everybody says, oh yes, we like the message. We don't need empirical evidence, which is what academia is all about. We just like the message. This is Fridays for Future, environmental activists taking over academia. And I personally think that's the worst category of scholarly bullshit that's out there. And as I said previously, my own article is a rant, so you may also count it in that category.
Hi there, just a quick one. If you find our conversations worth listening, why don't you share them with your friends and connections? Please help us reach more and new listeners by leaving a review, commenting, or rating us on any platform where you get your podcast. We can't wait to hear your thoughts and ideas, so share them with us via a social media platform or email. Find more details in the show notes. Now let's get back into today's conversation. This is a super important conversation that I think that both the industry and academia need to actually indulge in. Most importantly, for the industry, they should understand the things that goes on in academia. And these things that you mentioned, honestly, I read through your paper actually on my Mendeley here. That part is highlighted in red. And I keep reminiscing on this particular part because I'm like, these things are very, very true. But then there are issues in academia. Of course, people do not do these things intentionally just to get it off and then just leave academia, probably to graduate and other things. But there are requirements in academia for master students and PhD students, even undergrads, to go through before they sort of graduate. And these are things that might not change now. It's going to be difficult. Of course, I'm going to ask you your thoughts on how we can turn around all these things, because that's part of your conclusion in this paper. But what I'm keen to know right now is, how did you get this published? Briefly, can you tell us the struggles that you went through? Because I think in one of the paragraphs, you mentioned that one of the reviewers actually clearly mentioned that I may meet resistance with some of my co-editors, but I'll try and defend your paper. How did you get this thing through?
It wasn't a piece of cake, if I may say so. So I first submitted that article to one of the most known journals on sustainability, and I submitted it directly to the editor-in-chief, who loved it. And I'm also citing that editor-in-chief in the paper. And he literally wrote back, Julian, this is a bit provocative, but it needs to be said.
Yeah.
And I will defend your paper to get it published in my journal. I want this to be in my journal. Now, sadly, in a sense, the editor-in-chief of a journal is not the benevolent dictator, right? Economists would say of the journal, but they need to also collaborate with their co-editors.
Yes.
So he double-checked once he was happy with the paper with the co-editors. He wanted to accept the paper. He had basically accepted the paper, and then the co-editors shut it down. They said, this will not get published in our sustainability journal. It's just discrediting the research that's being published.
Wow.
Now, the editor-in-chief apologized to me. He was very upset I couldn't get it published in his journal, but he gave me a few tips where else to go. I went to a second journal, also a very famous journal. Second journal took just a few days, which is ridiculously fast, like the journal, to write back to me. They said, interesting piece, but we only publish opinion articles if there's a lot of recommendations on how to improve. And the problem with your article is you have a typology of bullshit. So you're describing the problem in detail, but you don't say how to solve it. That's why we need to reject the paper.
Wow.
I mean, they could have said, maybe revise it, add something. I think they're a bit afraid, right? So they rejected it very, very politely.
Yeah.
Now I went to a third journal, I submitted it there. Within 48 hours, they
48
wrote back to me. Yeah, very quick. Very quick, they wrote back to me. So they, I think it caught their interest. They wrote back to me, this is an interesting article. We discussed publishing it. However, we've never published such an article in an academic journal. So we don't think, actually it's an academic article. It's like the way it's written, it's very angry. We don't think this can go into an academic journal. Maybe you should put it on a blog. I said, thank you for the recommendation. I want to get it into an academic journal. Now, what I then did is I am on the editorial board myself of a sustainability journal. So I thought to myself, well, if I cannot get it into any journal where I'm not kind of like co-governing it, maybe I can get it into the one journal where I'm actually also one of the bosses, right? Where I'm one on the editorial board.
Yes.
So I wrote the editor-in-chief of that journal, Circular Economy and Sustainability, a young journal by Springer, which is one of the biggest academic publishers out there.
Yes.
And I said, Alessandros, I have this piece. It's a bit controversial. I want to publish it. Can we please publish it? And Alessandros, he read it. He got back to me very quickly and he said, I love it. And I love being a bit provocative. Let me handle this. And wow. I don't know who he selected for the peer review process. It's anonymous peer review, right? So he sent it off to 2 professors who gave comments on the article. We had tough comments. They also complained about the word bullshit in the article, which they felt was a bit unacademic. And they thus revised the first paragraph of the article, explaining that bullshit is meant as a wake-up call. Bullshit serves a function, which is that people look at it, that they read the abstract, that they start thinking, right? It's not cursing for the curse of cursing, for the sake of cursing. It is cursing to wake people up, which I think has worked. And Alessandros maneuvered this paper through the peer review process. I submitted it sometime in November. In fact, I submitted it November 15th. And on May 1st, I got a notification from the journal that this article has been published. And I was very excited it got published. And of course, I was also very excited to see the response. It got more than 1 million views on LinkedIn within 7 days. It's the most read article of the journal by far, not only by far. So last year, 120,000 downloads the journal has had. This article, the single article, in 8 days got 80,000 PDF downloads, which is crazy for an academic article. Yeah, I had lots of fantastic people reach out to me. I think more than 200 professors wrote to me and congratulated me on the piece, including professors who run some of the most prestigious sustainability journals out there. Professor running energy research and social science, Benjamin Sobakol, reached out to me, cited actually the article, said he loved it. Resource Conservation Recycling, one of the biggest sustainability journals out there, the editor-in-chief wrote me that he loved the article and he wished he had written it himself. Environmental Politics, one of the biggest political science journal, environmental science, actually put it out on their Twitter account, which really boosted the article. So it has just like, it's gotten endorsements from everywhere, including the academic elites that I'm bashing in that article. And I, of course, loved to see that, because I think it's one of these articles where everybody has been thinking it. It's the elephant in the room, and nobody has been willing to put it out there. And that's the wonderful thing for me, again, about being what I call pre-academic, so the practitioner academic. If I was a full-time academic, probably I would not have published the article. My university, Utrecht University, was not very excited about me publishing this article, to put it mildly. So if I was a full-time academic, this would have been something I could have probably not published, but because I am free as an academic, because it's a 10% gig on my Fridays for me, I can put out the stuff. And that's why I'm also, that's why I am, as you also said at the beginning of the conversation, David, why I honestly think there's a urgent demand for more people actually not living off academia, but being in a situation where something else pays their bread and butter every week, so that they can poke into the academic system whenever necessary.
Wow. Oh goodness. I don't know what to ask again. We're approaching, trying to conclude on this episode. But then, I mean, I was actually going to ask you about how has the response been, but I think what you have told me is just exciting. For me, I just couldn't get on my feet, because I knew that this is something super important to talk about. And I'm definitely citing this in my thesis as well. It's a very important topic to talk about. Well, with all the response that it has received, of course, you feel fulfillment, you feel this kind of energy that, I mean, people have at least, they can relate with what you wrote in your paper. Now, could you let us know what you want to achieve with this? I mean, moving forward, what's next? Because in your conclusion, you wrote something about producing less of such papers is no trivial task. It's not an easy thing to do. So with putting this thing out there, what do you think should be done? What's next?
So I hope that this paper really inspires many scholars out there to ask themselves, next time they embark on a piece of research, to ask themselves, is this me now merely adding to what I say is the pile of scholarly bullshit, or is this me actually contributing to the advancement of knowledge in my field? So I really hope that this paper has been a wake-up call for the many scholars out there that write papers each and every day, to think about what they spend their time on. And I think this will be tougher for the young academics out there that do not have tenure. I think it's a piece of cake to do for every single tenured professor out there. These are people that are unfireable. This is an extreme privilege, right? In the private sector, David, you and I work in the private sector, you can get fired like this. It's such a privilege to have tenure. And I think many professors out there don't live up to that privilege by the scholarship they are producing. So I hope that some of these professors will rethink, feel inspired, not just think about the next research grant, not just think about the next 1,000 citation piece, but actually think about what is scholarship that I can produce with the very limited time we all have on this planet Earth. What is scholarship I can produce that really makes a difference to the businesses, to the policymakers, to civil society, to the millions and billions of people out there. And if I could just inspire a single professor to produce that kind of research a bit more, I'm very happy with the impact that this paper has had.
Definitely. And now I think that all the things that you mentioned actually focuses more on the academic sector. But what about those of us who are probably outside academia, reading this, the industry, consultants? How should we also relate with, of course, this paper's outcome? What should we look out for when we are reading such papers? What should we look out for when we are also, for sure, all this greenwashing and things that are related to sustainability? What will be that message for those on the other side?
A lot of folks who read the paper and wrote me, especially folks from practice, but also younger academics, they shared with me that they've been reading these sustainability papers for so many years. And they always had this gut feeling that something was wrong with them.
Something is wrong.
And then they shared after they read my article that this paper gave them the confidence that not maybe something is wrong with the papers, but that actually something is fundamentally wrong with these papers. And I hope that those folks now will be more critical consumers of sustainability research out there. There is fantastic sustainability research out there. Maybe not 50% of the research, maybe 20, 25%. But you need to take something that comes out in an academic journal with a grain of salt. You should feel free to question. You should not blindly trust in research just because it's been published in a respected outlet. You should turn on your mind and ask the questions that come to your mind and poke holes to see if there are holes. And maybe even as a practitioner, you should also ask yourself if the research you need is not there. Maybe team up with an academic, or maybe go by yourself to produce that research yourself. Because I think also practice has an obligation to engage in research and to also actually help academics find the research questions that are relevant, right? And I think that is, that's also something that this paper hopefully inspired a few people to.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much, Julian, for making time for this episode. I know you're very busy, and making time for this is, I really, really appreciate it. But before I let you go, I have just two more questions to ask you, basically to just get your thoughts on what that sustainability mean to you. I know this is a funny question to ask at this moment, but I think it's very, very important to ask because of all the things that we've talked about today. Personally, what does sustainability mean to you, and what are you doing towards that?
So sustainability to means getting the trade-offs right between economic prosperity, and to me, economic prosperity always entails also economic growth, with social equity, with environmental quality. So getting these trade-offs right, getting all of these three things at the same time, which is not easy, not just today, but also tomorrow, and also in 50, also in 100 years. I think that is what sustainability is all about. And that's a very difficult task to complete and to accomplish. That's what sustainability is about. Now, what I try to do each and every day is to help organizations getting this trade-off right. Also, whenever possible, grounded in research I do. And just to give one small example, again related to this paper that very much excited me. I wrote the paper, I published the paper, and then a big healthcare player contacted me on LinkedIn, and they said, "We've just read your paper, we're in the healthcare space. We've actually never worked on sustainability, but your paper made us think. Would you like to write a sustainability strategy with us, for us?" I was very excited. Of course, I wrote back, yes. And they had almost no money. And I said, it's okay. I'm not doing it for the money, friends. It's okay. Let's just do it, right? I mean, I'll invest my personal time in this because I'm passionate about this.
Yeah.
And because it's one small puzzle piece to nothing less, but I mean, trying to kind of like make the world a bit of a better place, right? So I think that's the answer to that twofold question you posed.
Wow. Thank you so much. Really, it's an amazing answer. It could not be any further. My last question to you will be that if you have the chance to change anything about humans' behavior towards the environment, what would you change?
So I think the biggest barrier to sustainability, as also my own research shows, is a lack of consciousness in everyday consumer choices.
Wow.
Consumers, all of us, we're really routine animals. As a matter of fact, we buy around the same 120 products today, and in 10 years, it's still around the same 120 products. Think about your toothpaste. You're probably buying the same toothpaste brand for like 10, 15 years now. We're routine animals. We don't really think about our consumption, which is why it is so difficult for many sustainability products and services to really take off. Because even if they're as good as non-sustainable products, even if they're at the same price, the consumers are just routine animals. They don't change. So you need to be much better and much cheaper to get somebody convinced to switch to a sustainability product. That's a pity. As a matter of fact, we have a lot of products and services out there now in the sustainability space that are as good as the non-sustainable counterparts. And I think we all, as consumers, should be conscious, should be aware each and every day of every single consumer choice we make. Because with these choices, we are creating markets either for the non-sustainable products and services out there or for the sustainable ones. And we all have each and every day a choice, right, in pushing this entire system, in pushing the entire planet Earth one step closer to sustainability.
Wow. Everything you said today is just thought-provoking, including your paper that got us here. And really, I just want to say thank you so much for your time and for sharing your insights with us. This is something that will be going over and over, just to go over every single word that you said. And I think, of course, our audience are going to be also encouraged to make a change and also work towards, diverse ways in their careers. And everything that you need, if you're listening, to get in touch with Julian, is always going to be in the show notes. So just dive into the show notes and get to know more details. Julian, before we go, is there anything that we left out that you like to sort of highlight? Last words, and if anyone wants to collaborate with you and any projects that you're doing, with a consulting or research, maybe you could just let us know.
Yeah, please reach out. And David, I just want to end by saying thank you so much for inviting me to this podcast. I am very honored by it. And I love that you're doing this podcast because I think it's also one puzzle piece, right? And pushing all of us a step further, a step closer to sustainability. So thanks a lot for doing this.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming, Julian. Hey there. Thank you so much for sticking to the end of this episode. Now there is a call to action. So why don't you engage with our community of green charters on our social media platforms? Find more details and links in the show notes. Get involved with the podcast by emailing us at glcpodcast@echoamitsolutions.com or DM via our social media platforms. We cannot do the same things expecting different results. The urgency of climate change demands actions now and not in 2050. So, dear Green Chatters, see you on the next episode, and remember, live green.